She had always loved the piano. From the time she could barely reach the keys, she would spend hours pressing them, listening to the soft melodies she could create. The little room where she practiced was filled with an assortment of sheet music, some old and worn, others fresh and new. Her fingers moved with care and attention, each note a small expression of the thoughts and feelings she carried inside her. Today was different. She had been invited to perform at a local music competition, something she had dreamed about for years but never truly imagined happening. As she entered the hall, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The room was grand, filled with polished wooden floors and bright lights that reflected off the instruments placed carefully on stage. People were already settling into their seats, chatting quietly among themselves, some dressed in elegant outfits, some simply observing the scene with curiosity. The air buzzed with anticipation and a touch of tension. She noticed the other participants, each one carrying their own aura of confidence. Some wore expressions of focus, practicing in small corners, while others laughed and joked, showing no sign of worry. She felt a small pang of insecurity. She was aware of her own abilities, but this was a larger stage, and the audience was different. They expected perfection, or at least something impressive. The thought made her stomach tighten, but she reminded herself that she had prepared. She had spent countless hours learning, practicing, and perfecting her technique, and she would give her best. The judges were seated at the front, their faces serious, eyes scanning the performers as they prepared. One of the organizers approached her, smiling kindly, and whispered, "You'll only need to play a basic tune." She nodded, though a small flicker of doubt crossed her mind. A basic tune? Was that all they expected from her? She had hoped to show a bit more of her skill, but she reminded herself that even the simplest piece could be played beautifully. It was not the complexity of the notes that mattered, but the feeling behind them. As she walked toward the piano, she took a deep breath. The keys gleamed under the stage lights, inviting her to create magic. She sat down on the bench, her hands hovering above the keys, feeling the smoothness of the ivory beneath her fingertips. The hall fell quiet as the audience turned their attention toward her. She could hear the faint whispers of curiosity, some even tinged with amusement at the simplicity of her assigned tune. She felt the weight of their expectations, or rather, their lack of it, and it ignited a spark inside her. This was her chance to turn something ordinary into something extraordinary. The first notes she played were soft and careful. She followed the sheet music as instructed, each key pressed with precision. The melody was simple, almost plain, but she infused it with a gentle rhythm and subtle emotion. At first, the audience seemed to relax, some even leaning back with mild disinterest. They expected nothing more than a routine performance. But she let the music flow naturally, her fingers moving with grace, connecting each note to the next in a smooth, effortless motion. As she continued, she allowed herself to add slight variations, delicate touches that were not on the page but felt right in the moment. The notes began to carry more feeling, more depth. Her heart beat with the rhythm of her music, and she could feel the energy in the room slowly shifting. The audience started to pay closer attention, some leaning forward in curiosity, sensing that there was more to her performance than met the eye. Her mind was fully focused on the music, the notes, the expression, and the story she wanted to tell. She thought of her journey, the countless hours spent practicing alone in her room, the moments when she had doubted herself, and the times when she had pushed through the frustration to perfect her craft. Every experience, every emotion, flowed through her fingers into the piano, creating a melody that was uniquely hers. The hall was silent except for the sound of the piano, each note filling the space with warmth and emotion. She could feel the subtle reactions of the audience as they listened, their initial skepticism slowly transforming into genuine interest. Even the judges, who had maintained a serious demeanor, seemed to shift slightly, their expressions softening as they absorbed the music. She paused for a brief moment, letting a gentle chord resonate through the room, and then continued, her confidence growing with every note. The simplicity of the tune became her advantage, allowing her to explore the melody in ways that were unexpected. She played with timing, with emphasis, with subtle variations that made the piece feel alive. It was no longer just a basic tune. It was a reflection of her spirit, her dedication, and her love for music. As the performance continued, she noticed the audience leaning in, some holding their breath, caught in the moment. The whispers had faded, replaced by attentive silence. She could sense the connection forming between her and the listeners, an unspoken understanding that music, even a simple melody, could touch hearts deeply. The feeling was exhilarating, a mix of pride and joy, knowing that she had captured their attention, not through complexity, but through sincerity and expression. Every gesture, every movement of her hands, was intentional, shaping the melody into something memorable. She played not for recognition or applause, but for the pure love of the music and the desire to share it with others. The room seemed to fade away around her, leaving only the piano, the notes, and the emotions they carried. In those moments, she was completely herself, fully immersed in her art, and the audience could feel it. As the final notes of the simple tune lingered in the air, she allowed them to resonate, creating a moment of quiet reflection in the hall. The audience, captivated and moved, slowly began to clap, the sound growing louder as more people joined in. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief and happiness. She had taken a basic tune and transformed it into something that touched people, something that conveyed her passion and talent. She rose from the piano, a small smile on her face, feeling a sense of accomplishment. This was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. The audience's response, the subtle nods of the judges, and the applause made her realize that even the simplest challenges could become opportunities for greatness if approached with dedication, creativity, and heart. She had turned what was expected to be ordinary into a moment that would be remembered. And in that moment, she felt the true joy of music and the beginning of a journey filled with possibility. After her first notes filled the hall, she could feel a shift in the room. The audience, which had been initially skeptical, was now watching with curiosity. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other, their eyes fixed on her hands moving across the keys. She noticed subtle expressions of surprise and intrigue on the faces around her. Even the competitors, who had been confident and playful moments ago, seemed caught off guard by the way she made the simple tune sound so alive. Her heart still beat fast, but it was no longer from nervousness alone. She felt excitement, a growing connection between herself and the listeners. Each note she played carried a little more emotion than the last, weaving the melody into something that was slowly becoming more than just a basic tune. She felt her fingers move naturally, almost like they were thinking for her, responding to the music she felt inside. From the corner of her eye, she saw a few people in the audience nodding slightly, as if recognizing the care she put into her performance. She could sense that she was changing the atmosphere. The whispers that once mocked or doubted her were now quiet murmurs of admiration. She had expected to be underestimated, but she didn't let that stop her. Instead, she used it as fuel, letting it push her to express herself even more. She paused for a short moment, letting a chord linger, and then resumed, adding gentle variations she had never written down but had always imagined playing. The melody became richer, more vibrant, and filled the hall with warmth. Her mind was completely focused on the music, and the audience could feel her concentration, her dedication, and the subtle emotions woven into each note. It was as if she was speaking to them without words, telling a story that was personal and yet universal. The simple tune started to take on new life. She adjusted the tempo slightly, letting certain notes ring out longer, while other sequences were played with a light and playful touch. The audience began to respond unconsciously, some swaying slightly to the rhythm, others closing their eyes to absorb the full effect. She could see that people were no longer thinking about whether the performance was simple or complex. They were simply listening, captivated by the beauty that emerged from her hands. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, from hours spent alone in her small room to this grand hall filled with strangers who now hung on every note. She remembered the times when she had practiced until her fingers ached, the moments when she had felt frustrated and doubted herself. Those memories flowed through her as she played, giving the music depth and authenticity. Each chord reflected not just skill but the persistence, passion, and patience that had been her companions for years. As she continued, the atmosphere in the room began to change more noticeably. The skeptics were silent, captivated by the transformation of a tune they had assumed would be ordinary. She noticed a few faces of people who had initially smiled at the simplicity of her assignment now showing astonishment and respect. Even the judges, who had maintained a reserved and serious demeanor, seemed drawn in. Their eyes were fixed on her, some leaning forward slightly, listening intently. She felt an incredible sense of satisfaction, not from attention or applause yet, but from knowing that she was making an impact. Music had always been personal, but in that moment, it became a shared experience. The basic tune she had been asked to play was no longer just a task. It was a vehicle for connection, emotion, and expression. She had taken something small and ordinary and allowed it to grow into something that could touch others. Her hands moved with confidence now, guided by intuition and feeling. She added subtle harmonies and transitions that highlighted the beauty of each phrase. The audience was drawn into the ebb and flow of the music, caught in the rise and fall of the notes, and the gentle intensity she created. The performance became a journey, each measure telling part of a story that was uniquely hers, yet resonated with everyone listening. She glanced briefly at the audience, feeling a quiet pride in their reactions. Some were smiling softly, others had their eyes closed, completely immersed in the experience. She realized that her ability to take a simple tune and make it compelling was not about showing off technical skill alone, but about conveying heart, honesty, and emotion. It was about making the audience feel something real, something they would remember. The simple tune now had layers of feeling that even she had not planned when she started. The audience could sense the dedication and thought she had put into each note, the love for music that was evident in every touch of the keys. She felt a surge of energy and excitement as she continued, feeding off the quiet engagement of the listeners and letting it inspire her to express even more. The competitors nearby had stopped their casual chatter, watching silently as the performance unfolded. Some seemed to reflect, realizing that talent and emotion could speak louder than flashy tricks or complicated compositions. She had turned a basic assignment into a personal triumph, and it was impossible not to notice. Even a few audience members who had initially seemed disinterested now sat up straighter, fully attentive, and some had expressions of surprise and wonder. Time seemed to stretch as she played. She was no longer counting measures or notes, but following the natural flow of the music. The basic tune was evolving organically, and with each passing moment, she could feel the room holding its breath, the audience fully caught in the experience she was creating. She had expected a modest performance, something that would go unnoticed, but instead, she had created a moment of quiet fascination and connection. She allowed herself a small smile as she reached a particularly gentle section of the melody. She could feel the audience responding, even without words. The music spoke for itself, conveying feelings of calm, reflection, and joy. She felt a sense of purpose in what she was doing, understanding that every note she played had the potential to move someone, to create a memory, to inspire emotion. The room was fully engaged now. The whispers had disappeared, replaced by a collective focus on her performance. The simple tune she had been asked to play had become a canvas for her expression, a medium through which she could communicate in a way that words never could. She continued to play, fully immersed in the sound, the feeling, and the connection she was building with everyone in the hall. As she approached the end of the section, she took a subtle pause, letting the final notes resonate and hang in the air. The audience remained silent for a moment, absorbing the full impact of what they had just heard. Even though it had started as a basic tune, it had grown into something powerful and memorable. She could see the recognition in their eyes, the realization that something unexpected and special had just occurred. She continued with a few final chords, finishing the piece with care and elegance. The audience, now fully captivated, began to show their appreciation, some with soft claps at first, then louder as they recognized the artistry and emotion she had brought to the performance. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had successfully turned what was expected to be simple into something that had truly touched people. It was not just about playing the piano anymore. It was about creating an experience, sharing a piece of herself, and making a connection that would linger long after the last note faded. She could feel a sense of calm as she continued to play, the music flowing through her fingers as if it were part of her own heartbeat. The audience remained silent, their eyes fixed on her hands and the piano. They had been drawn in by the simplicity at first, but now they were captivated by the depth of expression she was bringing to each note. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, becoming more intimate, more attentive, as if the hall itself were listening with her. Her thoughts wandered briefly to the moments that had brought her here. She remembered the small, dimly lit room where she had practiced alone for years, fingers stumbling at first, notes clumsy, and rhythm inconsistent. Those hours of repetition, frustration, and persistence had molded her into the pianist she was today. Each mistake had taught her something new, each success had built confidence, and each quiet moment at the piano had deepened her love for the instrument. It was this experience, more than anything, that gave her the ability to transform even a simple tune into something moving. As she played, the melody began to take on subtle layers she had not consciously planned. She added delicate ornaments here, a slight variation in rhythm there, all guided by intuition and feeling. The music became more than notes. It became a narrative, telling a story without words. She imagined the people in the audience listening not just to her fingers on the keys, but to the emotions behind them, the dedication and heart she had poured into every practice session, every performance, every small step along the way. Some in the audience shifted in their seats, leaning forward with surprise and admiration. The skeptics who had once whispered and exchanged amused glances were now quiet, caught by the unexpected depth and beauty of what they were hearing. Even the judges, who had maintained a formal, reserved demeanor, could no longer hide their interest. Their eyes followed her hands closely, tracking every movement, every subtle nuance. She sensed their curiosity, their growing respect, and it added a quiet confidence to her playing. Her focus deepened further. She began to notice small details in the acoustics of the hall, the way the notes resonated and lingered in the air, and she allowed these subtle echoes to guide her. She played with the timing of the melody, holding some notes longer and letting others flow more quickly, creating a gentle rise and fall that mimicked natural breathing. She imagined the audience experiencing the music as a journey, with its moments of tension, release, calm, and reflection. A few moments of silence between phrases allowed her to feel the room's response. She could see faces with soft smiles, eyes closing to absorb the sound fully, and a few heads nodding ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the emotion she was conveying. The simple tune, which had been intended as a small, unassuming task, was now alive, breathing with life and meaning. She was no longer just playing. She was sharing a piece of herself, her history, her passion, her soul. Her hands moved with greater freedom, no longer constrained by the basic structure of the tune. She added gentle flourishes, subtle dynamics, and variations that highlighted her skill without overshadowing the music itself. Each note seemed deliberate, thoughtful, filled with intention. She wanted every listener to feel the care she put into every phrase, to understand that even the smallest melody could carry immense emotion when approached with honesty and love. The audience's reactions grew more apparent. Some whispered softly to each other, commenting on how beautiful and unexpected her interpretation was. Others were silent, completely absorbed, caught in the intimacy of the moment she had created. She could sense a ripple of awe moving across the room, a quiet recognition of the talent and dedication she displayed. Her heart swelled with a mixture of humility and pride, knowing that her effort and passion were being felt, understood, and appreciated. As she approached the middle section of the piece, she felt a surge of creative energy. She allowed herself to explore the tune more deeply, adding contrasts of volume and tempo that brought out hidden emotions within the melody. She could hear the subtle changes in the audience's breathing, the slight shifts in posture, and the focused attention that had replaced any initial doubt. It was as if the music had wrapped the hall in a delicate, invisible thread connecting her to every listener. She imagined the journey of each person listening, the personal memories and emotions that her playing might evoke. The soft notes might remind someone of a quiet afternoon, a fleeting childhood memory, or a moment of peace they had longed for. The stronger, more resonant chords might stir feelings of joy, hope, or resilience. She realized that this was the true power of music, not just to entertain but to touch hearts, to create moments that linger and resonate far beyond the immediate performance. Time seemed to stretch and fold around her as she played. She was no longer aware of the hall, the lights, or even the people themselves, only of the music and the connection it was forging. Each note she pressed carried weight, intention, and life. She felt herself becoming one with the piano, the melody, and the audience's experience. The once basic tune had transformed into a complex, layered narrative that spoke of perseverance, passion, and the beauty found in simplicity. The competitors who had initially seemed confident were now watching in silence, their casual demeanor replaced with genuine curiosity and admiration. She noticed their eyes following every subtle movement, their expressions softening with recognition of her skill and artistry. Some of them seemed to reflect on their own approach to music, realizing that confidence alone could not create the depth and connection she was producing. It was not just about technical ability, but the heart behind each note. She paused briefly, letting a chord linger in the air. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the silence amplifying the impact of the sound. Then, she continued, weaving the melody into a delicate crescendo that moved naturally and gracefully. She felt a sense of harmony between herself and the audience, a shared understanding that music could speak in ways words never could. Every subtle shift in tempo, every gentle emphasis, was met with an attentive, receptive response from the listeners. As she neared the final section of the piece, her confidence grew. She played with a sense of purpose, a quiet assurance that she had mastered not just the notes, but the emotions behind them. The melody, simple though it had begun, now carried layers of meaning and resonance that she had discovered in the moment. The audience was fully engaged, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, all connected to the music in their own personal way. Her fingers danced across the keys with fluidity and grace, bringing the tune to a gentle, reflective conclusion. She felt the energy in the room shift again, this time as a wave of recognition and appreciation. The audience had experienced something unexpected, something memorable, and she had guided them through it with skill, sensitivity, and heart. The basic tune had become a medium for expression, communication, and connection, and she had succeeded in transforming it into something extraordinary. The final chord resonated and lingered, filling the hall with a sense of closure and satisfaction. She allowed herself a quiet breath, aware of the attentive silence that followed. Every person in the room seemed affected, moved by the journey she had taken them on. Even the judges, who had been reserved throughout, showed subtle signs of admiration, acknowledging her ability to turn a modest request into a remarkable performance. As she lifted her hands from the keys, she felt a rush of emotion. Relief, pride, joy, and gratitude all at once. She had started with a simple challenge and transformed it into a shared experience that touched the hearts of those listening. She had proven, not just to the audience but to herself, that dedication, creativity, and sincerity could elevate even the most basic of tasks into moments of beauty and significance. The journey was far from over, but in this instant, she had achieved a small but meaningful triumph, and it filled her with inspiration for the performances yet to come. As she continued to play, the music seemed to grow, taking on a life of its own. The simple tune, once quiet and unassuming, was transforming under her hands into something rich and expressive. She felt every note resonate through the room, connecting her to the audience in a way that words never could. The melody flowed naturally, guided by her feelings, and each chord she played seemed to tell a small part of a larger story. The audience, initially skeptical, was now fully absorbed. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, captivated by the transformation taking place before them. Others had their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them, each note evoking memories or emotions they hadn't expected to feel. She could sense the quiet excitement, the subtle shifts in posture, the deep breaths taken as they absorbed the beauty of her interpretation. The once basic tune had become a living, breathing entity, filling the hall with warmth and emotion. Her hands moved with increasing confidence and fluidity. She experimented with dynamics, letting some notes linger softly while others rang out sharply, creating contrasts that added depth and texture. The simplicity of the original melody gave her the freedom to explore, to make each passage uniquely her own. She played not for recognition, but for the sheer joy of expressing herself, and the audience felt that sincerity in every note. It was a quiet, yet powerful connection, as if the music were speaking directly to each listener. As she reached the middle section of the performance, she allowed the melody to evolve further. She added subtle variations, small improvisations that highlighted her skill without overshadowing the beauty of the tune itself. The audience responded without hesitation, their attention fully captured. She could feel the room vibrating with energy, a quiet acknowledgement that something extraordinary was happening. The simple tune had become a vehicle for emotion, storytelling, and personal expression, and she was leading everyone on a journey they would not soon forget. Her mind was completely focused on the music, but a quiet awareness of the audience's reactions added to her inspiration. She noticed faces shifting from curiosity to awe, whispers fading into silence, and a few people exchanging glances as if to say, "I didn't expect this." The judges, who had initially watched with professional detachment, seemed captivated. Their eyes followed every movement, appreciating not just the technical skill but the emotion and intention behind each note. She felt a surge of creative energy and allowed the tune to reach a gentle crescendo. The notes built upon each other, rising and falling like waves, carrying a story of persistence, passion, and quiet triumph. Every subtle variation, every change in tempo, and every dynamic shift contributed to the narrative she was crafting. The audience was no longer listening to a simple melody. They were experiencing a performance that had grown from simplicity into complexity, from expectation into surprise. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a brief moment, letting the music guide her fully. Her fingers moved instinctively, each chord and arpeggio flowing naturally from her heart to the keys. She imagined the stories and emotions of each person in the hall, thinking of the memories the melody might stir, the peace it might bring, and the sense of wonder it could inspire. Music had always been her language, and now it was speaking louder and clearer than ever. The competitors, who had been watching from the sidelines with quiet skepticism, now seemed taken aback. Some shifted in their seats, as if reconsidering their own approach to performance. They realized that talent was not just in technical skill but in the ability to transform something ordinary into something unforgettable. She had taken a basic tune and infused it with life, emotion, and artistry, leaving an impression that was impossible to ignore. The audience's engagement deepened further as she continued to play. She explored the softer sections of the tune, letting each note resonate, breathing life into the pauses, and highlighting the contrast between gentle and powerful passages. The hall seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the emotional layers she was creating. Even those who had been indifferent or dismissive at the start were now leaning forward, fully immersed in the music. Her heart swelled with a quiet joy as she realized the impact of her performance. She was no longer playing alone. She was sharing a conversation, an experience that connected her to everyone in the room. The melody, once simple, had become a conduit for communication, expressing emotions that words could not convey. She felt the energy of the audience, their attention and responsiveness, and it fueled her to give more, to explore the tune further, and to convey even more depth. Every hand movement, every gentle press of a key was intentional. She allowed the music to breathe, giving space for the audience to absorb and feel each emotion she expressed. She experimented with tempo, letting some phrases flow slowly, full of reflection, and others move quickly, filled with lightness and joy. The balance between control and freedom gave the performance a natural, organic quality that resonated deeply. The hall was alive with a quiet energy, a shared experience that went beyond the notes themselves. Each person listening was interpreting the music in their own way, yet all were connected by the beauty and sincerity of the performance. She could sense a collective understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the skill and passion she had poured into even the smallest details. The simple tune had evolved into a narrative, a journey that captivated and inspired. As she approached the final passages, she allowed the melody to soar, the notes ringing with clarity and emotion. Her fingers danced effortlessly across the keys, expressing both delicacy and strength, capturing the full range of feeling she had been cultivating throughout the performance. The audience remained fully engaged, some leaning closer, others closing their eyes, all absorbing the experience fully. She felt a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment, knowing that she had taken a humble task and transformed it into something extraordinary. Her imagination guided the final chords, shaping them with care and intention. The hall seemed to vibrate with the resonance of her music, and for a moment, there was complete silence as the last notes lingered in the air. The audience, captivated and moved, could not immediately break the spell. Even the judges, who had seen countless performances, seemed quietly impressed by the transformation of a simple tune into a performance filled with depth and expression. She opened her eyes, noticing the faces of the audience. Their expressions softened, their attention fully captured. She felt a quiet sense of pride, not from recognition or applause yet, but from knowing she had shared a meaningful experience. The simple tune, once underestimated and overlooked, had become a moment of connection, beauty, and inspiration. She had turned expectation into surprise, simplicity into richness, and in doing so had created something truly memorable. Every gesture, every subtle shift in dynamics, every gentle emphasis on a note contributed to the unfolding narrative. The audience had been transported by the music, carried along by her interpretation, and drawn into the journey she had created. She realized that the true power of her performance lay not in technical display, but in the emotional honesty and care she had brought to each phrase. The once basic tune had become a vessel for expression, emotion, and human connection, and she had guided everyone through it with grace and skill. She continued, moving toward the conclusion, her hands guided by intuition and heart. Each note was deliberate yet natural, creating a sense of flow that felt effortless. The music rose and fell, capturing attention and imagination, allowing the audience to feel every nuance. The simple tune had become a living story, unfolding with emotion, rhythm, and intention, and she played with confidence, fully aware of the power she held in her hands. The hall seemed to vibrate with the resonance of the performance, a quiet energy connecting every listener. The simple tune had become extraordinary, and she had done it without showiness or exaggeration, relying solely on skill, passion, and sincerity. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had created a moment that would linger in the minds and hearts of those who had listened. It was a triumph of dedication, creativity, and the ability to transform even the simplest opportunity into something remarkable. She felt the music reach a new level as she played, the simple tune now fully alive with emotion, expression, and depth. Each note seemed to carry more weight than before, resonating through the hall and creating a powerful atmosphere. Her hands moved with precision and grace, yet each movement felt natural and effortless. The melody was no longer just a basic tune. It had become a full story, unfolding before everyone in the audience. She noticed the audience's reactions changing. Eyes were wide, faces softening, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, completely absorbed in the performance. There were whispers of admiration at first, but soon the audience was entirely silent, giving their full attention. She could sense the energy in the room shifting, a quiet anticipation building, as if everyone were waiting for what she would do next. She smiled faintly, knowing she had their attention and that the journey she had created with her music was working. Her fingers moved faster now, yet with perfect control. She added intricate variations and subtle improvisations, highlighting the skill and emotion that had always been within her. The basic tune had become a canvas for her artistry. She played with contrast, sometimes soft and delicate, sometimes strong and passionate, letting the music rise and fall like waves. The audience responded unconsciously, swaying slightly, leaning in, completely immersed in the sounds she created. She paused briefly to let a chord linger, and in that quiet moment, she felt the room holding its breath. The silence was as important as the sound, giving weight to every note she played. She continued, allowing the melody to expand and reach heights she had only imagined in private practice. Every note, every pause, every dynamic shift contributed to the story she was telling without words. The simple tune had transformed into something unforgettable. The judges, who had been observing quietly, now leaned forward, captivated. They whispered among themselves softly, exchanging glances that showed recognition and admiration. Her performance was no longer just a basic assignment. It was a demonstration of talent, heart, and dedication. The audience, too, seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. The energy in the room grew, filled with a mix of excitement, awe, and emotional connection. She let herself be guided by the music entirely, allowing intuition and feeling to direct her fingers. The melody built naturally, each phrase leading to the next with fluidity and grace. She felt an inner calm, a focus that blocked out distraction and self-doubt. Her mind was entirely in the moment, and the audience could feel that sincerity. They were not just listening to notes. They were witnessing an experience, one shaped by her skill, patience, and emotion. The tune grew more complex as she layered subtle harmonies and rhythmic variations that added depth without overpowering the original melody. She maintained a perfect balance, ensuring that every listener could follow the evolution of the music while still being surprised by its richness. The room seemed to hold a collective breath, as if the audience understood that they were witnessing something special, something rare and beautiful. Her heart raced with excitement, yet she remained composed. She knew that this was the climax of the performance, the point where the melody would reveal its full potential. She allowed herself to push further, expressing not just the technical aspects of the tune, but the emotions behind it. Joy, longing, hope, and quiet triumph. The music became a dialogue, a conversation between her and everyone in the hall, where feelings were exchanged without a single word spoken. She felt a wave of energy as she reached the peak of the tune. Her hands moved faster, more decisively, yet the sound remained fluid and expressive. She emphasized key moments with gentle pauses, letting the resonance of the piano carry the emotion. The audience responded, leaning in, absorbing every nuance, and allowing themselves to be swept along in the experience. She realized that she had successfully turned a simple task into a performance that had captured hearts and minds. The hall seemed to vibrate with the intensity of her playing, the energy in the room reaching a crescendo along with the melody. She played with both strength and delicacy, conveying every emotion she wanted to share. Every chord, every arpeggio, every dynamic shift was purposeful, contributing to a narrative that was deeply moving. She felt proud, yet humble, knowing that the connection she had forged with the audience was not because of showiness or gimmicks, but because of honesty, skill, and passion. The competitors who had watched skeptically at first now sat in quiet admiration, some whispering softly to each other, others simply absorbing the moment. They understood that talent was not just about technique or confidence, but about the ability to transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. She had done exactly that, taking a basic tune and turning it into a performance that resonated deeply with everyone present. She slowed slightly, allowing the music to breathe, giving the audience space to reflect on what they had just experienced. Each note hung in the air, resonating and echoing, creating an emotional impact that lingered. The melody, simple in origin, had become profound, a testament to her dedication and love for music. She could sense the awe in the audience, the admiration in the judges' expressions, and the quiet excitement of her peers. It was a powerful, shared moment. She allowed the final section of the tune to develop naturally, building to a gentle, graceful conclusion. Her fingers moved with care, each chord deliberate, each phrase intentional. She felt the weight of the performance, the importance of conveying emotion and story through the piano, and she embraced it fully. The simple tune had become a vehicle for connection, and she was determined to honor that opportunity to its fullest. The audience was fully engaged, some closing their eyes to absorb every note, others watching her hands with quiet fascination. The judges seemed visibly impressed, exchanging subtle nods and soft murmurs of recognition. Even the skeptics could not deny the power of her performance. She had taken something expected to be ordinary and elevated it, creating a moment of shared experience and genuine admiration. She played the final notes with care, letting them resonate fully, filling the hall with sound that was both complete and lingering. The silence afterward was profound, a quiet acknowledgement of the impact she had made. She rose from the piano bench, her hands resting lightly on the instrument, feeling a wave of satisfaction, relief, and pride. The audience remained still for a moment, as if savoring what they had just witnessed, before breaking into applause. The clapping grew louder, more enthusiastic, and soon the entire hall was filled with the sound of appreciation. She smiled, a mix of humility and pride, knowing she had turned the simple tune into a performance that touched hearts. She had achieved something remarkable, not through complexity or showiness, but through dedication, emotion, and the ability to transform expectation into glory. She looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had witnessed her journey. Their expressions reflected surprise, admiration, and a newfound respect. The competitors, who had doubted her at first, now nodded quietly, acknowledging her talent and artistry. The judges were visibly impressed, their earlier reservations replaced by recognition and praise. She had created a moment that would be remembered, a triumph of skill, heart, and the transformative power of music. She took a deep breath as she prepared to finish, feeling the final section of the tune flowing naturally under her fingers. The music had grown beyond the basic melody she had been asked to play, carrying layers of emotion and expression that she had discovered in the moment. Every note she pressed reflected the journey she had taken. The hours of practice, the quiet dedication, the persistence, and the love she had for the piano. She knew this was her moment, and she wanted to make it count. The audience remained completely still, captivated by the transformation of a tune they had expected to be ordinary. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, while others closed theirs, letting the sounds wash over them fully. She could feel the energy in the room, a quiet, shared anticipation that had been building since the very first note. Every chord she played added to the growing intensity, and she felt a connection with every person present. The music was no longer just notes. It was a story, an experience, and a bridge between her and the audience. Her hands moved effortlessly over the keys, each movement intentional yet natural. She allowed the melody to breathe, letting certain notes linger longer and others pass with gentle fluidity. The dynamics shifted subtly, bringing contrast and depth to the tune. She was fully immersed, letting the emotion guide her, and the audience felt it. They were no longer observers. They were participants in the story she was telling through sound. The once basic tune had become a vessel for expression, and she held it with care. She reflected briefly on how far she had come. She remembered the quiet afternoons practicing alone, the moments of doubt, the repeated attempts to perfect each movement, each note. All of that had led to this performance, this connection with the audience that was growing with every passing measure. She felt a quiet pride, not in herself alone, but in the music, in the way she had allowed it to evolve and reach its fullest potential. It was a victory not measured by applause yet, but by the emotional resonance she could feel spreading through the hall. The melody began to rise toward a gentle, graceful climax. She added subtle flourishes, variations she had never written down but felt in her heart, allowing the tune to express more than it had when she began. The audience responded, their attention fully captured, their expressions showing awe and admiration. Some faces reflected surprise, others joy, and a few had tears quietly forming, moved by the sincerity and beauty of her performance. She knew she was touching them, not through showiness, but through honesty, skill, and emotion. She allowed the music to slow slightly, creating space for reflection and absorption. Every pause, every sustained note, added weight to the unfolding story. The tune had grown from simplicity into a rich tapestry of feeling, each element carefully balanced and expressive. She felt the audience responding in subtle ways. The quiet breathing, the attentive posture, the soft nods of appreciation. She smiled faintly, knowing she had taken a humble melody and transformed it into something meaningful. Her focus intensified as she played the final measures. She wanted to convey completion, satisfaction, and grace. The notes flowed effortlessly, yet every touch was deliberate, filled with intention and care. She could sense the audience leaning in, feeling every emotion she poured into the performance. The once basic tune had become extraordinary, a reflection of persistence, creativity, and the power of music to touch hearts. She was proud, not for recognition, but for the connection she had created. As she played the last chords, she allowed them to resonate fully, letting the sound linger in the hall. The silence that followed was profound, a collective pause that emphasized the impact of the performance. She felt the room holding its breath, the audience savoring the experience, acknowledging the journey she had taken them on. Every person present had witnessed a transformation, from a simple task to a moment filled with emotion, artistry, and heart. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder as people clapped enthusiastically. The energy in the hall shifted into celebration, a recognition of what she had accomplished. She rose from the piano bench, a smile on her face, and allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of having succeeded. The audience's clapping, cheering, and occasional standing ovation reflected their appreciation and the impact of the music. She had taken a simple tune and turned it into a moment of glory, one that would linger in their memories. She looked around the hall, noticing the expressions of admiration and surprise. Competitors who had doubted her initially now nodded quietly, acknowledging her talent and artistry. The judges exchanged impressed glances, a silent recognition of the dedication and skill that had gone into her performance. The audience, captivated from start to finish, had been moved in ways she could not fully measure, yet she could feel the significance of the moment. It was a shared triumph, one that went beyond applause and recognition. Her heart swelled with emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had transformed an ordinary challenge into a remarkable achievement, creating a connection with everyone in the room. She understood that her success was not just about playing notes correctly or impressing others, but about the expression, the sincerity, and the emotional depth she had brought to the music. The once basic tune had become a powerful story, a celebration of dedication, creativity, and resilience. The applause continued, growing louder and more enthusiastic, filling the hall with warmth and energy. She allowed herself to absorb the moment, letting the sound of appreciation wash over her. It was a validation not only of her talent, but of the countless hours she had spent learning, practicing, and perfecting her craft. The audience had witnessed her journey, and in their response, she felt the true meaning of her performance. The power to inspire, to connect, and to create lasting impressions. She glanced back at the piano, resting her hands gently on the keys. The instrument had been her companion, her voice, and her medium for expression. Through it, she had communicated emotions that words could not capture, telling a story that was felt rather than spoken. She understood that this moment, this transformation of a simple tune into something extraordinary, would remain with her forever, a milestone in her journey as a musician. As she stepped back and joined the applause from the audience, she felt a sense of fulfillment and gratitude. She had achieved something remarkable, not through showiness or technical display alone, but through heart, dedication, and the ability to turn a modest challenge into a moment of beauty. The audience's response, the admiration from the judges, and the quiet respect of her peers affirmed what she had long known. That music, when played with sincerity and passion, had the power to move and inspire. The hall continued to echo with applause, the atmosphere alive with recognition and admiration. She took a final, deep breath, allowing herself to savor the moment fully. The simple tune had become a testament to her dedication, skill, and emotional connection, and she had turned it into a performance that would be remembered by everyone who had witnessed it. She had created a true moment of glory, one that reflected not only her talent, but the love and commitment she brought to her art.